On the evening of the 14th of May 1982, the men of D Squadron, 22 Special Air Service Regiment, gathered on the flight deck of HMS Hermes for a briefing on an operation that was already running behind schedule. The carrier had been fighting heavy headwinds all day, arriving late at the launch point. The Sea King helicopters hadn't been prepared in time. The original plan had allowed 90 minutes on the ground. Now the troopers were being told they would have 30 minutes to destroy 11 enemy aircraft and get out before dawn broke over the South Atlantic. Major Cedric Delves, the officer commanding D Squadron, would lead the raid. Among his troop commanders was Captain John Hamilton, a 28-year-old Green Howards officer who had passed SAS selection and taken command of Mountain Troop. 3 weeks earlier, Hamilton had survived 2 helicopter crashes in a single day on the Fortuna Glacier during the operation to retake South Georgia. Winds gusting beyond 100 miles per hour had turned a reconnaissance mission into a desperate fight for survival. When extraction was ordered, the first rescue helicopter crashed on the ice. The survivors piled into a second aircraft, which also went down. Only a remarkable feat of flying by Lieutenant Commander Ian Stanley, who landed his Wessex in near impossible conditions and crammed 17 frozen men into a machine rated for far fewer, had prevented a catastrophe. Hamilton walked away from both wrecks. 2 days later, he was among the forces that captured Grytviken. Now D Squadron was planning another raid, this one against an airstrip on a small island called Pebble Island. The problem with Pebble Island was what sat on its grass runway. The Argentines had established a forward operating base there shortly after their invasion, designating it Aerodromo Auxilia Calderon. Intelligence and reconnaissance had confirmed 11 aircraft, 6 FMAYA-58 Pucaras, 4 T-34C Turbo Mentor trainers being used in a light attack role, and 1 short Skyvan transport. The Pucaras were the real concern. These twin turboprop ground attack aircraft had been purpose-built for counterinsurgency warfare, designed to operate from rough, unprepared strips, exactly like the one on Pebble Island. They could carry 20mm cannons, machine guns, bombs, rockets, and napalm. Against troops caught in the open, against helicopters ferrying wounded and supplies, against the vulnerable landing ships that would soon be delivering an entire brigade to the beaches of San Carlos. They represented a serious threat. The amphibious landings were scheduled for the 21st of May, just 7 days away. Every Pucara destroyed before then was one less aircraft that could strafe the beachhead while Marines and paratroopers were at their most exposed. Airstrikes had been considered and rejected. Pebble Island's small civilian settlement lay close to the airstrip. The 25 or so islanders, mostly sheep farmers who had lived there for generations, could not be put at risk by bombs dropped from Sea Harriers. The only way to guarantee precision was to send men on the ground who could walk up to each aircraft, place charges exactly where they needed to go, and ensure that only military equipment was destroyed. D Squadron had been waiting aboard Hermes since the South Georgia operation. This was exactly the kind of work the SAS had been created for. In July 1941, a young lieutenant named David Sterling had convinced Middle East Command to authorize a new kind of unit. His idea was simple. Small parties of highly trained men could infiltrate behind enemy lines and destroy Axis aircraft where they sat on desert airfields. Traditional commando raids required large forces, naval support, and complex extraction plans. Sterling proposed something leaner. 4 or 5 men with rucksacks full of explosives could do as much damage as a squadron of bombers, then slip away before the enemy knew what had happened. The concept worked. Sterling's raiders destroyed over 250 aircraft in their North African campaign, attacking airfields at Tamet, Sirte, Benghazi, and Sidi Hanesh. In one famous raid, 18 jeeps mounted with Vickers machine guns drove straight onto an airfield at night and shot up everything in sight, destroying or damaging around 40 aircraft in 15 minutes. 40 years later, D Squadron was about to demonstrate that the regiment's founding principles still applied. The reconnaissance for Pebble Island had begun on the 10th of May, when an 8-man patrol from Boat Troop paddled ashore in Klepper canoes. These collapsible 2-man kayaks had been standard Special Forces equipment since the Second World War. Silent on the water and nearly invisible at night, the patrol cached their boats above the high tide line and moved inland across terrain that offered almost nothing in the way of concealment. The Falklands are largely treeless, covered in coarse grass and boggy peat that sucks at your boots with every step. Establishing a covert observation post meant scraping a hole in the ground and lying motionless while the freezing wind cut through your smock. The boat troop did what they were trained to do. Over 4 days they watched the Argentine positions, counted the aircraft, noted the disposition of the garrison, roughly 150 naval and marine personnel housed in the settlement buildings and the sheep shearing sheds, and identified fuel and ammunition storage areas. On the morning of the 14th of May, they transmitted the message that would set the operation in motion. 11 aircraft confirmed, squadron attack tonight. Aboard Hermes, problems began stacking up immediately. The headwinds that had delayed the carrier's approach meant the launch would be late. The Sea Kings couldn't be readied on the flight deck while the ship was still ploughing through heavy swells. By the time everything was in place, the operational window had shrunk dramatically. What had been planned as a 90-minute assault with multiple objectives, destroy the aircraft, eliminate any radar installation, potentially engage the garrison, would now have to be completed in 30 minutes. Major Delves made the decision quickly. The aircraft were the priority. Everything else would be abandoned. Get in, kill the planes, get out. Shortly before midnight, 2 Westland Sea King HC-4 helicopters of 846 Naval Air Squadron lifted off from Hermes, carrying 45 men. The troopers were heavily burdened. Each man carried an M16 rifle, many with M203 grenade launchers fitted beneath the barrel. The squadron had packed more than 181mm mortar bombs, bundles of plastic explosive, and 66mm Law anti-tank rockets. Every man in the assault element was hauling at least 2 mortar rounds, in addition to his personal ammunition and equipment. Accompanying them was Captain Chris Brown of 148 Commando Forward Observation Battery, Royal Artillery, whose job was to direct naval gunfire support from HMS Glamorgan, a county-class destroyer waiting offshore with her 4.5-inch guns loaded and ready. The helicopters touched down at Phillips Cove, roughly 4 miles from the airstrip, at a landing zone the boat troop reconnaissance team had selected and marked. The men fanned out into a defensive perimeter as they unloaded their equipment. The first thing that struck them was the moonlight. It was extraordinarily bright, and on the flat, featureless terrain of Pebble Island, any movement would be visible at great distance. A trooper from Boat Troop linked up with the assault force and briefed them on the latest intelligence, then guided them toward the objective along routes that had been walked and proved during the reconnaissance. The approach did not go entirely to plan. In the darkness, despite the bright moon, Mobility Troop became separated from the main force and lost their bearings. They had been designated to carry out the demolitions. Time was bleeding away. The plan was quickly adapted. Mountain Troop, Hamilton's unit, would take over the demolition task. Mobility Troop would form the reserve once they found their way. The force pressed on. They reached the staging area and deployed into their assault positions. The mortar team established their firing point. Cut-off groups moved to cover the approaches and prevent any Argentine reinforcement or counterattack. Each trooper dropped off his allotment of mortar bombs and spare ammunition at the support position before moving forward. The assault element, 14 men in 2 7-man teams, prepared to enter the airfield. As they approached the perimeter, they spotted an Argentine sentry. They remained undetected. Slipping past him in the darkness, they moved onto the airfield itself and began their work. The Pucaras were larger than expected, standing high off the ground on their long landing gear, which had been designed to give clearance for external weapons loads on rough strips. The SAS troopers had to climb up to reach the cockpits. The technique was direct: smash the canopy glass, drop in a thermite grenade wrapped with plastic explosive. The thermite would burn at several thousand degrees, destroying the instruments and avionics. The explosive charge would ensure catastrophic structural damage. They placed their charges on the same section of each aircraft deliberately. This would prevent the Argentines from cannibalizing parts from one wreck to repair another. At 0700 Zulu, the signal was given. HMS Glamorgan opened fire. Guided by Captain Brown's corrections, 4.5-inch high explosive shells slammed into the Argentine positions around the airfield. The fuel dump erupted. The ammunition store began cooking off in a series of secondary explosions. Simultaneously, the SAS mortar team dropped bomb after bomb onto the garrison buildings, pinning the defenders under cover. The assault teams on the airstrip opened up with everything they had. M16 crackled on automatic. M203 grenades thumped into the parked aircraft. Law rockets streaked across the grass and punched through fuselages. The demolition charges detonated one after another, cockpits filling with white-hot thermite fire. The Argentine response was negligible. Caught in the combined fury of naval bombardment, mortar fire, and the close quarters assault, most of the garrison stayed in their shelters. In the chaos and confusion, believing this to be the opening phase of a full-scale invasion rather than a hit-and-run raid, the Argentine defenders detonated pre-positioned denial charges that had been buried beneath the runway to prevent its use by the enemy. The Argentines cratered their own airstrip. Shrapnel from one of these explosions caught an SAS trooper, wounding him. Within 30 minutes of the assault beginning, Major Delves ordered the withdrawal. Every aircraft on the airfield had been hit. 6 Pucarás, 4 T-34C Mentors, and the Skyvan were burning or wrecked beyond repair. The fuel and ammunition dumps were ablaze. 2 British soldiers had been wounded, one by shrapnel from the Argentine denial charges, one concussed by a mine, but there had been no fatalities. The assault force pulled back toward Phillips Cove, carrying their wounded with them. Argentine troops, realizing the British were leaving, attempted to engage. The SAS returned fire with small arms and grenades, suppressing any pursuit. According to British assessments, the Argentine commanding officer may have been killed in this exchange. The Sea Kings were waiting at the landing zone. The force boarded, lifted off, and flew north through the darkness toward Hermes. They landed on deck in time for a hot breakfast in the wardroom. Sea Harrier reconnaissance the following day confirmed the damage. All 11 aircraft had been destroyed or damaged beyond any possibility of repair. The runway, cratered by the Argentines themselves, was unusable. Pebble Island would play no part in opposing the San Carlos landings 6 days later. Roughly half of Argentina's Pucará force in the Falklands had been eliminated in a single 30-minute action. The raid was immediately recognized as a complete success, the largest SAS operation since the Second World War, a direct echo of the desert airfield attacks that had made the regiment's name 4 decades earlier. D Squadron had demonstrated that the founding concept still worked. A small group of determined men, moving fast and hitting hard, could achieve results far out of proportion to their numbers. But the war was not over, and for many of the men who had stormed across that airstrip, the worst was yet to come. On the night of the 19th of May, just 4 days after Pebble Island, a Sea King helicopter carrying SAS personnel between ships crashed into the South Atlantic. The cause was believed to be a bird strike, though it was never conclusively determined. Of the men aboard, only 9 survived. 22 died, including 18 from D Squadron, many of whom had taken part in the Pebble Island raid. It was the single greatest loss the regiment had suffered since 1945. John Hamilton was not among the dead. He continued to fight across the Falklands in the weeks that followed. On the night of the 21st of May, as the main landings commenced at San Carlos, the SAS conducted a diversionary raid at Darwin to draw Argentine attention. Hamilton then deployed 40 miles behind enemy lines with his troop to establish observation posts overlooking the Argentine defensive positions around Port Stanley. On the 27th of May, he identified an enemy probe toward the squadron's position, and in the firefight that followed, captured an Argentine prisoner. The next night, his troop held off another attack, enabling 42 Commando Royal Marines to fly in and reinforce the position. The day after that, his men ambushed an Argentine patrol and took 5 more prisoners. On the 5th of June, Hamilton took a 4-man patrol to West Falkland, establishing an observation post just 2,500 meters from the Argentine garrison at Port Howard. For 5 days, he transmitted detailed reports on enemy strength and dispositions. On the morning of the 10th of June, he and his signaller, Corporal Roy Fonseca, realized they had been surrounded by troops from the Argentine 601 Commando Company. There was no possibility of reinforcement. They were outnumbered and outgunned with no avenue of escape. Hamilton ordered Fonseca to fight their way out. The only withdrawal route was completely exposed to enemy fire. Hamilton initiated a firefight to cover his signaler's movement, telling Fonseca to go while he held the Argentines' attention. During the exchange, Hamilton was hit in the arm. Despite being wounded, knowing the situation was hopeless, he continued firing to allow Fonseca to get clear. Fonseca made it through the Argentine lines and was eventually captured. Hamilton was killed. When the Argentine commander at Port Howard, Colonel Juan Ramón Mabragaña, was interrogated after the surrender, he made an unusual request. He asked that the SAS captain be decorated for his actions, calling Hamilton the most courageous man he had ever seen. Hamilton was posthumously awarded the Military Cross. His citation spoke of outstanding determination, an extraordinary will to fight despite hopeless odds and despite being wounded, and his conscious decision to sacrifice himself for his signaller. Hamilton was buried in the small cemetery at Port Howard, where he remains today. A point on West Falkland was named after him. At the Mount Pleasant Military Complex, a street bears his name. In the regiment's memorial garden in Hereford, his name is inscribed alongside those of the men who died in the Sea King crash. The raid on Pebble Island achieved everything it was designed to achieve. 11 aircraft destroyed. The threat to the San Carlos landings eliminated. No British fatalities on the night. It was a textbook special forces operation, planned at speed, adapted on the fly, executed with precision, and extracted before the enemy could mount an effective response. It proved that the principles David Stirling had established in the Libyan desert in 1941 remained as valid as ever. The men who carried out the raid were not superhuman. They were cold, heavily laden, working against an impossible time constraint, navigating unfamiliar ground in bright moonlight that should have made them visible for miles. Things went wrong. Units got lost. The plan was cut in half before it even began. They adapted and completed the mission anyway. That is what the SAS was built to do. 4 decades later, the airstrip on Pebble Island is used again for light aircraft. The settlement still tends its sheep. The islanders, who sheltered in their homes while explosions shook the night, have mostly passed on. Occasionally, pieces of corroded aircraft wreckage surface from the peat where they were left. They are reminders of a night when a few dozen men walked out of the darkness, burned 11 aircraft to the ground, and vanished before dawn. Just wanted to pop on at the end and say thanks for watching today's video. Just wanted to ask if you could please subscribe to the channel, give the video a like as well, I'd really appreciate that. I'm trying to get this video to 1,000 subscribers. Catch you in the next video. Cheers everyone.